welcome to our 7th week of Kernel KBCast. This week, we only have one more week left of a kernel, Sean. You know, it's kind of feel a little bit sad with things going on.
Time has passed really quickly.
It's
been a quick fellowship.
Indeed.
Excited for the guest. We have Daniel on later.
That's right. Yeah, we have Daniel Friedman. He's a co-founder, organizer for Active Inference.org. And but we still have a lot of things going on with the Kernel Fellowship this week as well. So I guess I'll start with how it's going with the Gitcoin, because our ending date for the Gitcoin was March 24th. And still have a few showcase we had scheduled before that. And thanks for everyone for donating for KBCast. It was very nice for all the kernel supporting us, for kernel fellows supporting us.
Yeah, thank you everyone. We also have the showcase of a few of the projects later this week. About 40 plus projects are presenting. And we'll get to see a lot of what some of the fellows did over the last 7 weeks or so. Yaji, I know you attended a lot of this week was heavy on juntos, specifically some of the DeFi juntos. So I had an opportunity to attend some of them, but it seems like you attended all of them.
Yeah, I think I really enjoyed the DeFi one from Ali and Nick. This week they had the DeFi 102 and graduating to 201. And for the 102, it's on the 21st, talk about the price discovery innovation led by Nick. And he talked about pretty much how we make the token price go up, a few mechanisms like burn, algorithmic, stablecoin, vault escrow, rebasing, token transfer taxes, lock drops, yield farming, staking, and also the utility. It was a very interesting discussion to see how we design the tokens, help the price going up using a few of those mechanisms. And on the 22nd, we talked about auditing, also led by Nick. Honestly, auditing was probably the most surprisingly interesting one for me, because I thought it was kind of boring topic. Personally, not a big fan of audit overall, but when Nick talked about that, I kind of realized the importance of auditing and doing the things in the right way can save you a lot of headache for later, and the importance of putting the bug bounty and good practice for auditing. So it was quite helpful.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting evolution of originally audits were mainly for devs to check the security of their code, and now there's this additional value proposition of basically telling retail investors that they can trust your protocol because it has a mark of a certification stamp, like from Consensus or some of these other organizations.
Yeah. Are you planning on auditing? Do you have any plan audit your own code?
When I have a protocol, yes, I probably will do some audits. I'm speaking with some folks who may actually have a machine learning way of doing that. So maybe I'll be able to save some headache of waiting, 6 months and paying $500,000.
And so expensive. Maybe we should learn how to be an auditor on that, be a freelancer on this.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah, another thing on the DeFi 201 is the MEV and arbitrage investing strategy. It's led by Connor. MEV is a minor extractable value, which is a totally new concept to me. Honestly, I never even heard of this before that session, but it was very interesting to hear the type of value you can extract it from the miners, from the mining, from block production, in excess of a standard block reward and gas fees by including extracting and charging the order of transactions in the block. It's kind of a long sentence, but pretty much.
Yeah, I think this goes back towards the notion that Ethereum is a dark forest. Basically, there are all these attackers or in some cases, they may not necessarily be fully malicious, but they're waiting to take advantage of transactions.
Right.
I think Connor was talking about, or at least Nick was talking about, a AMM called CowSwap, which helps to protect retail investors from these. But I really appreciate Connor putting together that Notion page with all the different strategies.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I was kind of looking to see if I can try one at some point. And another session I did on Friday was impermanent loss, also led by Nick and Ali. It's kind of the opportunity cost between providing liquidity and holding tokens. This one actually I read before the session and understood a little bit, but when Nick explained that more, it just definitely opened up the kind of the options I saw for the impermanent loss. But it was a very interesting explanation, and some of the examples give out from all the people attending the session. Did you go that one, Sean?
I did not make that one, unfortunately, but I'll have to check out the recording.
Yeah, definitely. I will check out all the recordings on the sessions. And another really interesting thing for the Junto was the fundamental of token economics. We are honored to have Lisa Tang, the author of the book, giving us a Q&A on the book on Thursday. It was quite an interesting session, I have to say. Even getting up early in the morning, totally worth it for me.
Yeah, I wish I could have attended. Unfortunately, it was 4 a.m. Pacific time, so I don't think I was that excited to wake up at that time, but I'll check out the recording.
Yeah, definitely. I would recommend checking out the recording. I just absolutely love the way she answered the questions. So very straight and logical, just like, kind of remind me of the really good econ professor when they are talking things. They break down 1, 2, 3, 4 really quickly. Even, some questions are coming all different angles in the chaotic way, but he was able to answer a lot of those stuff in the very logical order. And it was quite fascinating for me to hear she think about the tokenomic design. It's like kind of like using the first principle of designing the world for designing the crypto space. Like we come into the world with a physical object around, and we discover all the principles in the physical world. Now in this crypto world, it's kind of a brand new, and then we're trying to design the system that can operate in this new space. And a good tokenomic design will give the project a way longer lasting value and a lot of interesting incentive model, which we don't see in the Web 2 or Web 1 world. And definitely shout out to Ali on his moderation. It was a really smooth transition, and he was able to pick all the interesting questions that we did on Slido, and then people had a vote on whatever question. He was able to group out what are related ones, and also give a good interaction with the guests. It was a very, very good session.
Yeah, shout out to Mohammed as well, who was able to get Lisa to talk to us in the first place.
That's right. Yeah, definitely. Another one, I guess I went to. I did a movement with Anthony. It was kind of midday stretching. It was quite relaxing and moved around a little bit. Sean, I know you went to a few of those DAO sessions. I know you hosted your venture DAO this morning, right? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I attended the DAO tooling, the first 15 minutes at least of the DAO tooling session. That was a good overview by James and Alice. I'll have to look over that again. I know James is involved with so many different DAOs, so really looking forward to that recording. I feel like there's only so much time in the day to even do this. I feel like I'm going to spend all my weekends looking at all of the recordings moving forward. I did present on venture DAOs, the second part, so going through the history of 2020 to present, talking about really the Cambrian explosion of venture DAOs. So everything from collector DAOs, Pleaser DAO, Flamingo DAO, the new art collectors of the world to angel investor collectives like Global Coin Research, Orange DAO, which is a DAO of former YC or former and current YC founders, and many, many more examples. So I think it's a fascinating space to see the explosion, also the platforms like Syndicate and Tribute Labs, which are enabling the formation of a lot of these investment DAOs beyond the traditional Malloc DAO standard and adding a lot of flavors on top of Malloc DAO overall. The other thing that was happening this week is that there was a lot of in real life meetups, right, Yaji, that basically across the world.
Yeah, across the world. Really excited to see that. It seems that people are getting familiar with each other from Zoom calls and now meeting up in person.
Yeah. I think there's even a London dinner tomorrow, and there was a SF Bay Area one on Thursday night. Unfortunately, I could not make it, but I have attended a few before. Tell me about some of the last guild sessions. I think these are the last guild sessions for Regen and DeSci, right?
Yeah, I think both Regen and DeSci is the last session of the three. For the Regen, still led by John and Holly, and it was a lot of reflection on what we are doing and thoughts on about this Regen world. I really like the part. I think maybe it was Jomo or Christina mentioned. It's kind of like empowering the locals, lowering the barrier for entering this like a self-hosting local blockchain, and kind of empowering the local people to do the certain things, even they may not have a high technical background. Kind of think about your neighbors and your your neighborhoods or some of the local community. You can making a tool that is mostly like a DAO or some other like a Web3 tool that is only a few people understand, but then no one gonna use that in the average people. So their concept of like kind of lowering the barrier was quite interesting. Just think about it, trying to make this system inclusive enough so average person can jump in to be part of the DAO and then contributing to their local community. And another point, I forgot who mentioned that one. I think it's Jomo mentioned that one too. Talk about the struggling from the mass production and the versus the protection from permaculture. In the mass production, like a scale in the agriculture, people are looking for efficiency, looking for throughput, which is better for scaling and economics growth. But you have the cost of damaging the environment, damaging the kind of the diversity of the species, all the stuff. And on the other side, on the permaculture, it's good to protecting the environment, all those things with the system, but the always struggle with scaling and making the profit. So he was just talking about like how we balancing into the two. We didn't have a good answer to those, but I think it's a good way to think about how we're approaching that in the future.
Got it. So it's kind of balancing a desire for just absolute economic growth with really sustainability of communities and the externalities that come with it as well, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And for the DeSci one, I only attended halfway, but it was also a reflection on kind of how we build together, how we build a community, and a lot of the principles and the values from the DeSci world. How about you, Sean? I know you went to the DeFi and what's the other one?
The Gaming Guild as well. So yeah, I attended the DeFi Guild. I think, Gaji, you might have been there as well at both of these as well, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in addition to some of my observations. But I thought the DeFi Guild was really useful. We had Mark Boring, who is the Chief Legal Officer of BYDX. He previously worked with Julian on his startup or his protocol in the DeFi space. really useful advice in terms of how to navigate various regulatory entities, what to do, what not to do, more importantly. And also what you can do yourself, like simple things like incorporation and the like. There's a lot of vanilla platforms that can be used to build that out. So finally, we have the gaming guild as well. So we had that with Tim Shell. Tim Shell is a contributor in the space. I think it was really interesting to have Tim Shell during the GDC week here in San Francisco. Tim Shell is one of the key conspirators behind the Loop project. He's really the one who helped take it to the point where it's become a hyperverse, this collaborative social game among many constituents. I think a large part of the focus is on CC0 and derivative projects, as well as this notion of meta, the organized metaverse versus the rebellions. So the rebellions are really the hyperverse and entities beyond the traditional organized metaverse that Meta is trying to create. And he said that both should ultimately exist at the end of the day. So fascinating conversation, worth a listen if you all haven't had the time to talk through that, and definitely check out Loot Foundation. Finally, we're gonna wrap up real quickly before we bring on our guest, Daniel, in the next couple of minutes. So we had a fireside with Niran Babalola on scaling principled games. So Niran is the founder of Panvala. He talked a little bit about the creation of Panvala, how he created this offsite in real life where he incentivized people with real life tokens, poker chips, in fact, to actually make this retreat the best retreat that could ever be. And
like the one he's saying, they're printing the real physical chips, sending, giving to people. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, he rained it down on people at the end of it. So that was a really funny example. He also talked about some historical economic principles, like what Henry George talked about land taxation, and his move to drive that forward. Unfortunately, unsuccessfully, because individuals were not necessarily seeing the self-interest that they could drive from land taxation. But it's something that should be considered, especially when we think about crypto properties and how maybe we shouldn't always reward only the early participants who continue to collect rents, but also the people who actually do work on these platforms. And then he talked a little bit about enclosure law and how that fit into feudal economies, and how feudal lords had given directives to share land, but actually people found a workaround to actually enclose the land with gates and have sheep graze, and that was actually a more profitable use of land than what was originally allowed by the feudal law overall. But very interesting conversations. Definitely recommend the full listen. Yaji, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Daniel, for coming with us. So we have Daniel Ari Friedman. He's a researcher at UC Davis and organizer and co-founder of Active Inference and Complexity Weekend. And he's a PhD about collective behavior of ants, which was really interesting to me when I saw his bio. So yeah, welcome, Daniel. Would you like to talk about yourself and your project, Active Inference Lab?
Sure. Thanks both for having me. I like slipping in and actually hearing that and kind of jumping on the treadmill while it's running. Pretty fun. And that's kind of like the kernel experience, isn't it? So as mentioned, I'm a researcher in insects, and I've been working on mainly ants for the last years, and have been a postdoc at Davis for 2 years. But even since graduate school, I was very interested in crypto, asterisk, everything that it was related to governance and scientific ecosystems and data. And so fused the research side with the opportunity here and have just been working on a few different projects, which I can go into, but wanted to just pause there.
Sure. Yeah, I saw you are a researcher on ants. So why you picking ants as your subject? It was quite rare to see that, for PhD study.
I think the first decision in the decision forest was for insects as cool models for studying genetics, like fruit flies. And of course, many other insects are too. So that's not really like an insect specific thing, but it's just how it happened to be when I was an undergraduate. And then studying flies was cool, but I became interested in behavior of systems and how even if you have the total perfect model of how the one insect behaves, collective behavior, especially if you think about the interactions like with the niche in the world, can just take it to a totally different place. Just like you can have your macroeconomic model or your mean field approximation, the kind of average, and then there's always this emergence when there's interacting entities. And so that's a similarity in decentralized systems, whether they're of the ant type or the crypto type. And yeah, it just happened to be that that's where I could study those things.
So are we all ants in this crypto economic world? And is someone studying this? I'm curious about the application of complexity science actually in this in crypto economics. And so often we talk about tokenomics, and they seem to be focused on at least economists in that field seem to be focused on very simple incentives. But I'm curious to hear perhaps your thoughts in terms of how complexity might actually apply in the crypto Web3 world, if you've thought of that at all.
Big questions, so I can give a thought, but that's definitely something that I hope that we
give us the 60-second summary. No, just kidding.
I hope in the coming years we have a better answer and URLs to point people to more specifically. But complexity can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And so my first take would just be complexity about recognizing multidisciplinarity and this tension between general patterns across different systems and then like the ultra particulars of a given system that we're trying to model in this map territory way and with different stakeholders with different preferences and different information. So qualitatively, we can use complexity to approach these complex systems with many interacting subunits and with all of these nuances to their behavior, and just use complexity like in the meeting room to take a breath and wonder what methods make sense and what does this time series analysis really mean, and how are we going to reconcile some of the technological challenges, or how are we going to take effective action in an uncertain future. It's not totally uncertain, especially over certain timescales, but there are complex patterns and there's the whole unfolding that we don't know about. So even before getting into the more nitty-gritty of complexity, like all the tools that it offers and terms and everything, I find it can be helpful just to start there and then see where that takes that specific team or project.
Well, I guess I'll go back to the Active Inference Lab. I was just looking at you guys' website and the Twitter stuff before our meeting. So I saw you guys have a slogan: serve, act, and infer on the logo. Is there any, do you have any thoughts on the words behind that? Just how do you guys started on this?
Okay, cool. Thanks for asking. So Active Inference Lab, it's a online lab, and we started with some people who are interested in combining active inference, which is like this developing way to think about perception and cognition and action. We wanted to combine that area, which we thought had a lot of potential to help make sense of systems and work with different kinds of systems. But the education in the community and several aspects of like the accessibility of that body of research was running a risk of basically creating a massive research debt, like a situation where people would not be able to effectively onboard into using this way of working. So we thought about what kind of an organization would be able to address that kind of a novel framework directly and tackle that specific issue of bringing X number of people to this level of familiarity with something that is also like sometimes challenging to learn and ambiguous. And at the end of 2020, when we were thinking about how to name and understand and begin those first chapters in the narrative, we returned to the idea of active inference, which, just like the name sounds like, it's like a two-stroke engine with action and inference. And there's tons of other areas that are very related that also model like action and perception. So people can search for those things like ecological psychology or cybernetics. It's sort of in that genre, but some other pieces attached. And the two-stroke engine, okay, amazing. Let's have a great two-stroke engine. But then what? So that is almost another parallel with some of the technology and framework development. Okay, so we'll have the knowledge graph and people can do this and they can allocate their attention this way, or they can reward with this type of an asset or shared ownership this way. We're like, we'll use this system to decide who's a steward or something. Okay, and then how will we like break that symmetry to do something specific?
So it seems like you're trying to get people to focus a bit more on the outcome as well that they're trying to drive, beyond the getting lost in the details of the specifics and mechanics to a certain degree. Is that fair?
I think so. That's okay. One fair take. And also there's a little bit of like an API, like a server sort of joke. Like, what if we had that as a service? Active inference as a service. So then it would be just like, here's serving that because it's a server. And also even within the active inference model, there's like this preference variable, and it just really delineates and helps be like, there's someone's expectations about a given future, and then there's their preferences. And then there's some situations where we're going to have like the same predictions about the future, but different preferences. So that's like a different scenario. That's like a game theory situation, of course. I mean, they all are, but in specifically like misaligned interests, but common prediction. But then where is it like people actually have the same preferences potentially, but they differ in their prediction or their certainty about certain things, or even just their attention to different parts of the problem. And so how will we have effective joint action in those settings where there's like complex cognitive agents that have sometimes partially known and partially aligned interests? So we need the tools and ways to think about that I hope a few people or a medium number of people will work on in Active Inference Lab, but more broadly, everyone can potentially be involved in that kind of a system that ends up succeeding.
Interesting. Is the target audience mostly for university researcher right now, or is in this is like college kids, or what's the kind of the target audience mostly on this platform using this now?
The current participants, some are in student roles, some are retired, like officially retired, but like kind of post-career and having some more time to return to ideas. And like other people are not in an academic setting. So I don't totally know. I would hope it's anyone who's interested to learn by doing. And like, if the volume knob for how much somebody wants to learn and apply active inference is low, then, that's fine. That's where we're at for most topics, like most of the time, basically. And then if somebody wants to learn about it, they can do it on their own. and engage with like asynchronous content, like papers and videos that exist, and maybe their friends. They also might want to engage in like a community where there would be a continuum between more informal discussions around these topics, but like imbued with rigor and accessibility, and then be only one stop there to like being included on a project that was applying it so you could see it in a different light, or being able to ask questions to key people. Okay. Instead of like smaller cliques of people with more partial vectors in the space. But this is the tension between centralizing and decentralizing. So it will always be like people outside of the lab bringing things in and out. And so I hope that it can be many kinds of people, though, in short.
Yeah, that is a very different form of doing education. I saw you guys have like a YouTube videos like guests or something every few days or a week. Is that the type of the main form of you guys' education, by interview other people and talking about that? Or do you have other form or way to teach about teach subjects?
Good question. So the live streams, the main types that we have had are paper discussions. So that will be like several hours over 2 or 3 intervals discussing a paper and the related work, and also like the work that was cited in the paper, some of the implications, related questions we have. So that kind of like a paper discussion, that's something that might be familiar to somebody with an academic background, because it is like a journal discussion, but we're kind of doing that in the open because we have a lot of papers to read and it's super interesting stuff, and it allows us to engage with our field and like practice and hear different perspectives and become familiar with like learning it and catch up with this copious amount of literature. And then the presentations are people like presenting from different perspectives, sometimes some advances in active inference, other times like on the periphery, like something that's a two-way street where some people are in active inference learning about this new area, but then other people might be interested in that area and then learning about active inference. And so since starting, a lot of the material has been live streams, because it's one-to-one time with a conversation. Yes, it takes preparation, like preparing for a presentation kind of, but you stop the live stream and then it's like one-to-one with the time of guests, for example. So it's like once you remove the video editing affordance, it kind of just like you blaze ahead. And in the background, though, we have been thinking more about educational resources should exist. So that's kind of being pursued on a few different angles. But I mean, Kernel opened some ways of thinking about education and community-based and cohort-based learning. And so it is at this current date of March 26th, 2022, we have some threads open, but we don't know what the final educational repertoire will be. But it'd be awesome if it included like professionalism and courses for people for different backgrounds and different preferences and different levels of commitment. Of course, different languages, human languages, and computer languages. So a lot of our educational work has also been like that kind of connections between languages and areas.
Cool.
I'm curious, what are some of your biggest takeaways from Kernel, or at least either learnings or what you might apply to Active Inference Lab? Nice. Not to put you on the spot.
Question? Yeah, no, it's the spot it is. I really like the emphasis, and not just like the top-down emphasis, but the actual bottom-up realization of having people reach out one-on-one. Like I felt welcome reaching out to people and appreciated it when people reached out to me, even if it was just one message and it didn't continue or more. And so like the way that there were edges being built within and between the cohort, and that there were like a lot of times to collide offered, which no person probably goes to more than a small fraction, but I just found like the edge and the emphasis on the personal learning, but also like in a very low, it was like the little vestige of testing with the flip card. And I was thinking it's fun to flip this card with the knowledge that it truly doesn't matter. And it's like play flipping this card and play learning rather than like certificate oriented learning or research where like it is fun, but also the rigor is a slightly different imperative. So and then also just to be exposed to people who are in one sense, like at the single adjective level, like in the same space, like in the same area sometimes, like education or research, but then also to have shared interests and knowledge with people who are working in totally different areas, and then seeing how there was like the external public received view on some of these areas, and then the ways that there was people underneath it. And so with a different kernel, with the kernel of our lab being the action perception loop, rather than like everything that we associate with kernel, let's just say, but everything that we learn about, and I'm sure it'll be like different through the different journeys and cohorts, but kernel's kernel is that. But even just the idea of having a kernel and thinking about that group of people as a seed in a bigger space, but also there being a history and a developmental trajectory for that kernel. There's probably a lot of other fun active kernel connections, but I hope other participants from both communities figure that out later.
Yeah, I do agree with you a lot on that learning part, because I feel like when you are talking with the peers, you feel a lot more motivated from learning and from other people's experience, what they are doing, instead of academically, like they teach you without even you knowing what's the use case. In kernel, we kind of see the use case first, and then you figure out how to go back to learn where it's coming from, why is that the case. So, yeah. Thank you.
One other thought. Well, can I have one other thought on that?
Oh, sure.
There's some types of learning where it's like you're not engaged in the practice or the concept, and then you kind of on board into it. Like if you didn't know an instrument and then you learned the instrument, you didn't know a language, and then you kind of onboarded into the language. And many people in kernel have already been in the crypto space / situation for one or however many years, but I would say have been in crypto. And then there's also people who are just onboarding from a different area. So it's a first introduction for some, just like somebody might be learning about active inference for the first time. So like there's a layer where it must remain accessible, and having participation as a value basically means accessibility is a value. But it's just such an interesting model, and it results in things like us being able to talk. So I just appreciate the conversation, and hope that for you two or anyone else listening that we can stay in this space together.